Hi guys, so I'm here today for what is partly a two-book review and also just a small discussion on my beginnings with Jane Austen's work. So I have now, as of a couple of days ago, read two Jane Austen books. I read Northanger Abbey almost a year ago, and this was my first ever Jane Austen work, and I most recently read Mansfield Park. I'm sure we're all familiar with who Jane Austen is. She wrote in the 19th century somewhat coming of age and romance stories that followed characters and women from the upper classes of English society. Now everybody goes on and on about Jane Austen. I'm sure I'm not alone in being slightly apprehensive when going into novels and authors whose work is so hyped up. I will say, however, before I say much else, that I really enjoyed both of these novels. So let's talk a little generally about my experience with Jane Austen and getting into Jane Austen. Prior to having read either of these books, I'd seen at least one film or TV adaptation of every Jane Austen book. So I was familiar with the storylines. I think for some people, being familiar with the story can put them off reading the book, whereas other people really enjoy reading a book after having enjoyed a TV or film adaptation. I have to say that having seen adaptations of both of these books took absolutely nothing away from the experience of them. Obviously I knew the conclusion, I knew who ended up together. However, there was something that remained quite suspenseful and engaging throughout the stories, despite me knowing, yeah, but I know what's going to happen. My head still kept going, but what is going to happen? I don't know. And I think that's a sign of good writing. I think it's fair to say Jane Austen was a great writer. I really enjoyed the way these books are written, and especially I can say for Mansfield Park, the book itself is a lot fuller than the adaptation I saw, which was a film adaptation starring Billie Piper, which was fun, but nothing compared to the book. So much more happens, the characters are so much more developed and intricate and complex than they're portrayed in that film adaptation. And I think that's something, if you have seen film and TV adaptations of Jane Austen but haven't read the books, you can look forward to in the books. They are a lot more complex. What I really appreciated was how complex the characters were, how they all have their flaws and their positive characteristics, whatever that means. Neither of the lead characters in either of these books were paragons of goodness that we should all aspire to be, but they were likeable characters, identifiable characters who experienced identifiable emotions and reacted in identifiable ways. And that I really enjoy, and it's something that I think you'll hear other people say about Jane Austen, and that I definitely agree with, is that although these are set in the 1800s, so the lifestyles of these people is quite far removed from our own, the manners of the time and what is socially acceptable for people of different classes and different genders is different from today, but the emotions and the personality traits and the experiences of these characters is no different from today. The feelings of unrequited love, of embarrassment, of misunderstanding, of figuring out your own feelings, of feeling out of place, of being unable to express your affections is no different from what you or I might experience today. And I think that's what makes these books resonate still with so many people and what made them resonate with me. Another thing I'll say for Jane Austen's writing is that there is something in her writing that is very comforting. There's something about the mannerisms and the writing which really wraps you up in the story like a warm blanket, if that makes sense. There's definitely some words that are kind of fallen out of use today that take a moment to recognise, some turns of phrase that aren't familiar that you kind of have to understand from context if you're not familiar with 19th century literature or Jane Austen. Little things here and there, but nothing major that should put you off if you haven't really read any classics or any 19th century literature. In fact, I think Jane Austen is a fantastic place to start if you're unfamiliar with classics and haven't read much literature sort of pre-1960s kind of time. I think you'll find that although it will seem strange for the first few pages, I find that it's actually, once I've gotten into it, really easy to follow. They're very engaging, and they are in fact page turners. I definitely found reading both of these books that they are page turners. I was really reluctant to put them down and really happy to be reading this book solely. Jane Austen was something that I was so happy to commit myself to and just read that book, would think about it when I wasn't reading it, and was so excited to get back to it. But briefly, the more specific aspects of the two books I've read. The first one, like I said, was Northanger Abbey. I think this is the shortest of Jane Austen's 6 novels, and this one's actually a bit of a parody of the Gothic novel genre that was very popular in Jane Austen's time. People were loving the Gothic tales, and she wrote a bit of a parody of the Gothic tales, which are quite absurd and lots of super dramatic things happen in them, and they're very over the top but good fun. And the protagonist in this story is a big fan of the genre herself and constantly wants her life to be like a Gothic novel. But she grows up a lot and learns a lot in this story despite it being so short. I actually am not very familiar with the Gothic genre. I'm pretty sure I've only read one Gothic novel in my life, so you certainly don't need to be familiar with Gothic novels to enjoy this book. It's all there for you and it's really enjoyable. And I also think it'd be a fantastic place to start with Jane Austen. It really got me into her stuff, and I think because it's shorter, it's got a intentional comical edge that it's going to be really easy to get into and a lot quicker to get through than say something like Mansfield Park. However, in saying that, I did read this one quicker. I don't know if that's just because of the mood I was in, because I was in a bit of a reading slump when I read Northanger Abbey. Pretty sure it was exam period at university. I just wasn't getting much recreational reading done. So I don't know if it's really a reflection on the two books themselves, but this book took me about a week to read, despite it being quite chunky. It's over 500 pages. And this story is set at Mansfield Park and follows the Bertrams who reside there, one of whom is Fanny Price, who's actually the niece of Sir Bertram and his wife, Lady Bertram, who lives with her uncle and aunt and her cousins from around the age of 10, because her own family don't have a lot of money and have quite a few children, so her aunt and uncle, to take the kind of stress off of her mother and father, take Fanny on as one of their own to raise and keep financially. I really liked Fanny. Like I said before, these characters aren't perfect, and I like that Fanny was just a person. She was just a young woman. She was quite shy and reserved, and she maybe didn't stick up for herself very often. She's also quite thoughtful and curious and kind and happy to help others. She is, however, quite taken advantage of in her family. She's not always appreciated that much by those around her. She is somewhat of an outsider as the sort of cousin and the niece of the family. And again, it's kind of about her growing up and her first experiences of love and the intricacies of romantic relationships, whether it be her own or those around her. And it was just a really wonderful story, and I really enjoyed reading it. Like I said, I started with Northanger Abbey, so I definitely recommend it as a place to start. I think next for me in the Jane Austens is going to be Sense and Sensibility. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are a fan of Jane Austen, do let me know which one is your favourite, and until next time guys, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye! The next question is, what books might we be surprised to see on your shelf? The best things I could think of that you might be surprised to see on my shelf are these two books, which have been on my shelves since long before I started a booktube channel, and those are vampire stories and masterpieces of terror and the supernatural